I would like to invite the other panelists to the floor so they can take their places already. And in the meantime, I will explain what we will be doing during this part of the lecture. As we've heard in both Michael Ignatieff's lecture, as well as in the column of Harun Shaikh, the battle of ideas or the public debate is crucial in an open society, and therefore it is also crucial that debate is part of this meeting. So therefore, we have invited these 4 panelists to discuss open society in more detail and also to specifically apply it to the situation in the Netherlands. So what we will do in this discussion is address 4 blocks or themes that have probably already been touched upon in the lecture of Dr. Ignatieff and the column of Harun Shaikh. So the first block will be politics in the traditional sense, in the state sense, the Hague politics and international politics. The second block will be the new friends of open society, so the institutions that can support it. And the third block will be the closest to home. It will address community building and identity formation and how open society translates into that close to home process. But first, the panel members. So first, Michael Ignatieff, you have already met and listened to. We're very happy to have you here in the panel as well as on the lecture, so welcome. Then secondly, Corien Prins, you've already met her as well. She is here as a representative of academia and science. She's already mentioned that she's a professor in law and technology, a former dean of law school in Tilburg, and is also in the advisory board of the NWO. So that is why she's here today. Then to the left of her is Marcia Luyten. She is here to represent the media as a supportive, as a friend of open society. She has over 20 years of experience as a journalist. Most of you probably know her from Buitenhof. And she is also a best-selling author with her novel Het Geluk van Limburg, which is about the decline of the mining industry in the south of the Netherlands. So that is why you are here. And then finally, there's Lilian Gonçalves. She is the former president of Amnesty International in the Netherlands and is currently active. She is active as a lawyer and a human rights activist in the Netherlands still. So we're very happy to have all these panelists here to have a discussion. So give them a warm applause, please. So before starting the discussion, I would like to invite the panelists to this podium to give an opening statement, or I will ask them an opening question to which they can respond. So I would first like to invite Lilian to give your opening statement. Thank you.
Dear guests, open society, its old enemies and its new friends. Corien Prins made a fantastic opening speech already, and there she mentioned that it's almost Sinterklaas. And I'm going to do the same. I'm not going to skip it, because it is something also personal. I'm also part of a minority, and every year when Sinterklaas is coming, there is around us a fierce discussion going on. That is fine. But for that reason, I also feel personally involved to share some ideas which are not personal with you. I'm also a lawyer. In a critical column in the Volkskrant of November 21st on the anti-peat demonstrations last weekend, Sinan Sankaya concluded, resistance begins obviously in a bus. Is this reference to the resistance of Rosa Parks, a black lady who on December 1955 refused to give up her seat assigned to black people in the backside of the bus? Conclusion from this incident is that the state did not protect anti-peace demonstrators who acted in a lawful manner. Moreover, no pro-peace demonstrator has been arrested. Even if the government had a valid reason to cancel the demonstration for security reasons, disturbance of the public order is not a valid excuse for not arresting pro-peace demonstrators. They acted against the law and created a dangerous situation by blocking public roads and inciting a riot. And by not acting, the government may use concern about impartiality. In this difficult area of massive terrorist attacks, it is understandable that states take more and more preventive measures to control and minimize risks. However, governments should not curb demonstration and protest too easy in the name of public order. By doing that, they maintain the status quo, which mostly favors the position of those in power. Voices of minorities might get lost in this process. Open society should protect the right of individuals to peaceful demonstrations, to freedom of speech within the boundaries of the law. Protection, however, requires in the first place some basic knowledge of human rights and of the Constitution. One of the findings of the Staatscommissie Grondwet in 2010 was that knowledge of the constitutional order in the Netherlands is very limited. Therefore, the Commission recommended paying systematically more attention in education to the principles of the organization of the public administration, the nature of democratic rule of law, and knowledge of fundamental and human rights. This recommendation was not related to citizens only, but also explicitly to the government itself and its office holders. This includes police officers. Question is what the role of the state should be in safeguarding fundamental rights in an open society. Is it only respecting and protecting them, or does it also pertain facilitating and enhancing them? With regard to freedom of speech and pluriformity of media, the Commission observed that the provision to protect pluriformity of information may lead a government to be actively involved in deciding which forms of pluriformity are admissible. That is, however, primarily a concern of civil society, for the citizens themselves to keep pluriformity of opinions and points of view alive. Taking into account the risk involved of an obligation for government to act with regard to freedom of expression, the Commission advised not to include the provision to protect, but to respect the pluriformity of media. In the end, the protection of the open society is a concern and obligation for civil society itself. This requires well-informed, critical citizens willing to protest and demonstrate to defend their fundamental rights and those of others. The seeds of illiberal democracy are sown in open societies in which the fundamental rights and freedoms of some are ignored or willfully neglected.
Thank you very much for that opening statement. I would now like to turn to Marcia Luyten to ask her for her opening words in response to the question. We've all heard how important strong media are to protect an open society, but what are its current and most important threats?
Thank you, Lydia. Yes, I've been asked to make a few remarks about media in this post-truth era. I remember when I was doing my education as a journalist, I was at the Volkskrant, I was taught this really important thing, that there was a method to try to reach an agreement on facts. And this method, it's called adversarial reporting. In Dutch, that is hoor en wederhoor. It means you've got to try to be even-handed, to hear all sides of a conflict. And it also means something else. It also means that as a journalist, you're independent and you're always controlling those who are in power. Those are the two meanings of that adversarial reporting. Well, today I find it's getting harder to reach a consensus on the facts. And you also find that is also because not everybody now automatically adheres to the same rules of the game. So there are two problems here. One is the filter bubble that Professor Ignatieff also already mentioned. And in that filter bubble, it's very hard to get to even-handed reporting that takes into account all the sides. Another thing is that you see there's a diminishing respect of one of the founding pillars of our liberal democracy, and that is the independent press. That brings me to a very, very important question, a question that also Professor Ignatieff raised, how to manage cyberspace. I think we should seriously examine what can a state do to prevent ill-intended fake news to disrupt our democratic order. Can fake news, if it is proven that it is spread with ill intent, can that become legally punishable? Yeah, and I can imagine that now lawyers are thinking like, oh my God, that sounds like censorship. To me, it doesn't. I think we have to dare look for rules in a new game of which we haven't set yet clear boundaries. We're now on a play field on which we are already behind. It's not about censorship, according to me. This is about 21st century warfare, soft warfare, and we need tools to defend ourselves. Maybe we need less tanks and other fierce combat devices, less than ICT experts, excellent prosecutors and good lawyers. That was the second remark. Then, what makes these things worse is this fragmentation of our worldview. That's what Professor Ignatieff referred to, talking about this algorithmic segregation. More and more we lack a common point of reference on how we perceive the world around us. I think most media are broadcasting to and are writing for the like-minded. This is something we should be really, really alert on, that the aggression that we're threatened with, that we withdraw from it and we try to take the exit rather than confronting it and defend fundamental rights. And then my fifth remark, and maybe that's an overarching problem. A huge problem with media, I think, is that news has become a commercial product. And as a commercial product, it can undermine democracy. I think it's especially this business model, driven by clicks and likes and hypes and emotions, that has brought Donald Trump to power and Brexit to Europe. And you see that our commercialized information environment, it really feeds on sort of primitive needs. I mean, I think man, in the end, is, he prefers sugar and fat to nuts and vegetables. So the same is with the information you consume. You'd rather read something that is emotional and that is a hype than reading a very complex feature. And this also leads to scandalizing news. And the major question is, can we leave the production of news, the production of facts, to the market? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcia, for those remarks. As a third opening remark point, I would like to invite Prins to share with us a little bit on how you experience diversity, which is often also a value associated with open society, and how you experienced the struggle that comes with diversity, being the first female dean in your university in Tilburg, and also maybe more in general what happens at universities and academia. So I would like to invite you to the podium as well.
And let me relate that to academia. As universities, and broader than that, societal partners as well, you might remember that we initiated the so-called Nationale Wetenschapsagenda. quite an effort in order to bring society and academia a bit closer to one another. Also as part of a broader ambition of the universities to be a bit more in interaction with society. All those peer-reviewed international publications read by 10 fellow academics, are they still relevant, or should we as universities relate much more to society? The Nationale Wetenschap-agenda, many different questions raised by society and brought onto the agenda of academia. But since then it has been silent. And I still have the feeling that we as academia are still a bit anonymous for society. And it is easy to criticize academia and in that way relate to one another, academia and society, in that virtual world. Because we do not see each other, we do not truly understand each other, too anonymous. So linking between academia and society, trying to deal with the sentiment in society that it is just an opinion, it's not fact, it's just an opinion, has something to do with the very fact that science is much too far away from society. And when we take up the challenge of interacting with society, we do that for a one-time moment, but then draw again behind the curtains and do not relate with society, or not enough. At least that's my impression. Nevertheless, I also see that there are challenges there, difficulties there, but much more openness, making ourselves understandable, making understandable why we do research, but also open for debate, much more than we do that now. And the final thing is media as a business model made me think of science as a business model, academia as a business model, the way we are financed today as universities, the competition that we face, the competition, the ERC grants and the NWO application that we write as part of, you could say, a business model for universities. So that in the end also relates, and that's my final remark, with how society sees academia. So academia, no, I should finalize differently. Of course, you can ask from society to have a bit more understanding for the knowledge of academia, and that it is much more than just an opinion. But on the other hand, I think that there's a responsibility for academia itself as well to have society feel a bit different.
Let me make a negative remark and a positive remark. Let me add to the negative remark by simply saying one of the things that Alexander Herzen, the great Russian socialist, said something that Isaiah Berlin loved and I've always loved. He said, the thing we have to remember is that history has no libretto. That is, history is not a song of freedom. History is just history. And that's important because I think there has been a kind of complacency about the future of liberal democracy. We're riding the wave of history. You know, the whole world is going to get to the Netherlands eventually, by which I mean everybody's going to imitate the Netherlands as a social model, or Denmark, or one of those great countries, or heaven help us, they might even imitate Canada, although that's very difficult. If you're perfect, it's, you know, almost impossible. And I just think that's not what's going to happen. The 21st century, there are many routes to the future. We cannot predict with confidence that Chinese state capitalism will fail. History doesn't work that way. We simply don't know. It means that we have to defend our societies without the certainty that we're riding a wave of history. That means we have to defend it more fiercely because we can lose it. I think one of the things about being in Hungary a country I love. I married a Hungarian. I must like the place. No, not necessarily. You're quite right. But I do like the place. That's something it teaches you. We bought into, I think Eastern Europeans bought into an idea of transition, which was a historical narrative. You start in a closed society, you end in an open society, hey presto, it's great. In fact, the transition goes on and on and on in very uncertain directions. But I think it's important for Western Europeans not to write Hungary off, to write Poland off, to think the story is over. We just don't know how it's going to end. And it's, I think, important for European solidarity that we help those democratic voices in Hungary and Poland, wherever, who are fighting. So that's the first point, is just, we could lose this, folks, so let's fight for it. History is not on our side, so that's kind of, number one. Number two, and it relates to all the comments about media and also about universities. And here I am a rational optimist, and I think this is something that Popper is very helpful to think about. Facts are stubborn things. The climate is either heating up because of man-made emissions or it's not, right? A policy either works or it doesn't. We can talk about post-truth forever, but eventually reality does make its choices, as it were. You either have a view of reality that illuminates and clarifies, or you don't. You can't be, our excellent column made the point about the mist. The mist, there is lots of mist out there. But certain things do turn out to be true because we falsify, we try stuff out, and it doesn't work. We try policies, they don't work. We try pretending that climate change is not going to happen, and then we discover certain facts that seem irresistible. And that leads me to think that we don't need to believe that liberal democracy is going to be in the mist or the fog forever. Certain things prove out to be true. And Donald Trump's flagrant attempt to deny certain facts eventually, in my view, gets punished politically. There are consequences for perverse, persistent denial of obvious realities, right? And to that degree, I'm a rational optimist because I think liberal democracies are full of the best educated people in the history of the world. That, I think, is historically true. This little machine contains the equivalent of the Library of Alexandria, and we all have one, right? We misuse them, we succumb to rubbish and nonsense. We're the best of them. But at the end of the day, certain things end up being true. And for that reason, I kind of feel when I get depressed myself, I say to myself, get a grip here. Reality is what it is, and reality teaches us infallibly what ends up being true in politics. And I, having lost an election, can tell you reality is a great teacher, right? And that's important. We're not in the mist forever, is what I'm saying.
Eventually, truth will prevail.
The biggest single challenge to open society, we're all painfully aware of it now, is 21st century migration. Mobility of capital looked pretty good after 1989. The Netherlands has profited greatly from the mobility of capital, but nobody really likes the infinite mobility of labor. And some people are refugees, clearly driven out by persecution, torture, war, and threats of violence. I think the international regimes that sustain those populations are still intact. I think if you asked ordinary Dutch citizens, should we provide refuge, and do we have an obligation to provide refuge to someone who is in fear of violent death, torture, or is the subject of a massacre or ethnic cleansing, the answer overwhelmingly, I think, still will be yes, and will be yes across many countries. The problem is what you're calling the fortune seekers, and there, the politics of migration depends on strengthening the language of the gift. That is, what works in Canada to a limited degree, let's not go overboard here, is the idea that we can give the gift of Canadian citizenship and a path to integration to a limited number of people at our discretion, consistent with border control. And because we're a very large country, we take in, almost the equivalent of 1% of population a year, which is not. That's the other point I'd make. There's no one size fits all here. There's no one open society model. What will work in Canada will not work here. What will work in the Netherlands will not work in Hungary. That's a feature of open society we need to understand, to respect national differences, national cultures, and national particularities. But the only political way to sustain a 21st century migration policy is to speak the language of the gift, not the language of rights, on the one hand. And on the other hand, the other thing to say is that what the public will not stand is illegal migration, because then you have a sense we've lost control. That's a threat to open society. No political system can survive having a sense that the borders are out of control. So you have to establish control of your borders, and that then means something else which is difficult, which is if you find illegals in the country, they have to be repatriated. That's really tough politics, and it's very nasty politics, and it has a lot of human rights problems, which are enormous. But you can't maintain the integrity of a society without repatriation. On the one hand. On the other hand, you have to have a legal migration stream. You've got to say to Nigerians, there are 160 Nigerians who arrived in Italy last year, you've got to say to Nigeria, there's a legal migration stream into Europe, and it's this number of people. Everybody else who comes in illegally goes back home to Nigeria, right? This is the rough politics of this.
Because of time reasons, I would like to move to maybe a slightly different topic, also already been pointed to in the various lectures and speakers, namely the role of experts. Many of us in the audience here are experts in some field, in policy making, or the 6 people who are experts in the media, according to the Mentimeter. I would like to ask you, maybe specifically Corien Prins, how do you feel as a scientist about the eroding role of experts in our society because of the rise of alternative facts? And how can we gain trust again as experts from our society?
I think I already reflected a bit on this, in that I think it's crucial to be open to a conversation, that it's crucial to not too much think from your own position, in that the other party, from the position of academia, why doesn't society understand academia's academic freedom, etc. The biggest challenge is, I think, to have a true conversation. I'm a professor of law and technology. You just referred to cyberspace, to protection of cyberspace, protecting values, human rights in cyberspace, and on the other hand, sometimes closed borders in cyberspace. I see my role as an academic in sound academic research, to set certain steps, small steps there, but also not only to publish on all those results in the peer-reviewed international publications, but to have a debate with society, inspire society to use our insights in taking it further.
Well, let me first react a bit to what Corien said, because what you say sounds beautiful, but it's also very abstract. So I'm immediately wondering, what do you mean? So, conversation with whom, about what exactly?
I find it truly important to give lectures. For example, in Dutch, for the Vrouwenvereniging van Goorle. I live in the southern part of Netherlands. I find that crucial, worthwhile, because it gives my audience of 100 ladies in the southern part of the Netherlands a feeling what privacy is about, a feeling that privacy is something more than just a fundamental right in our constitution. And that may sound abstract, but during that presentation, I show them, like you just did, what that world is about. I make them on the one hand frightened, and on the other hand offer them tools for their own unique position in that debate. I think that every individual can act in this debate, and that's the message I would like to bring then, and that makes it perhaps a bit less abstract.
And still there remains this question that I just brought up, how to overcome this really serious divide between, say, us, public TV station, and the people who are hostile to us, who feel that the public television is an enemy to them and is culturally against everything that they stand for. And they get their news from the internet.
Sorry for interrupting, but do you think that, for example, the lecture that Corien Prins would give would be a step to involve people who would normally not be in the right bubble, so to say?
Of course, yeah. Yeah, then you reach 100 people who might, normally not be in your science bubble, but now I was talking about the media, about my media bubble. This is, of course, a different bubble, and how could we reach people that are not yet converted? Yeah.
But it brings me to the next step, that we talked about states and their obligations and civil society, but there is also this elephant in the room of the big media companies that have the power. And in the old human rights struggle, you knew what to do about states. And I have the feeling that this is the same. We don't know exactly how to get to this power circle of the big media companies that brought you to be optimistic but had some doubts.
So, Michael, do you have any ideas maybe on this question?
Well, I have one. I have two thoughts. One of the reasons people like experts is that they talk down to people. They talk about people. They condescend to people. And in the wake of the Brexit events, for example, there was this, and in the wake of the Trump election, there was this kind of astonished discovery that there were millions of people who were disaffected, angry, excluded, deserted by the modern industrial economy, and never spoken to or talked to or listened to. And so, in its weird way, I do think that democracy ground out a shocking result in Brexit and in Trump. Simply, it made the experts, the elites, the media, the professors, I'm including myself, in kind of shocked realization they didn't understand their damn society at all, actually. They didn't understand anything about it. And that's one of the functions of democracy, to shock us into waking up to the realities that because of our bubbles, because whatever, we don't tend to face. If you ask me why I think your distinction between hope and optimism is good. The reason I'm kind of hopeful but not optimistic, I'm going to line up with Havel here. That seems like the right team to be on. I'm hopeful because this shock we've all had has been a shock about how little we understood and knew our societies. And it's humbling to so-called experts. I've been called an expert. I realize there's a hell of a lot I just don't have the faintest idea about. So it's a humility cure, which seems to me a good thing. That's kind of number one. Number two, the rule of the road that it's taken me a lifetime to learn, and I often break the rule, is talk about what you actually know something about. Part of the reason that experts get a bad name is that they start going off-piste. You know something about community, you know something about cyber law, technology, you know something about the media. Part of the problem if you're an expert is you start opining about every damn thing under the sun and you end up looking like a fool, but you also end up making all experts look like fools. And then the public takes a tremendous revenge. So I guess the model is stick to what you know and shut up about everything else. And allow yourself occasionally to be surprised by these societies.
So what I gather from all of your points is that there is this personal responsibility on an expert to go out and to approach people, to be humilitated. What is that word? Humble. Yeah, of course, humble. To be humble about what you can do. And now to end this part, I would like to give the floor to Professor Ernst Hirsch-Berlin, who is here as a member of the WRR and he would like to conclude this this afternoon for you. Thank you very much.
But there are common standards as well, and they are very much related to the core subject of this afternoon, and that is the value of an open society. And an open society means that requires, I emphasize here again something that was a part of what Michael Ignatieff said this afternoon, requires a constitutional structure that is able to protect the openness, the quality of openness, the free exchange of views within that society. And that's the reason why it was addressed by the panelists, but also by Haroon in his first comments, that requires that we don't accept a situation in which people are within our democratic constitutional system don't recognize anymore that in the end the constitutional system of a free society is a pattern of political and societal behavior that allows us that while we have different backgrounds, different convictions, different religions, different experience in real life, nevertheless come together and accept rules of behavior, policies that are binding for all of us. That is the way in which political discourse, and that's also where our contribution might come into political life, how we have to go hands and forth between generalized viewpoints and specific situations and experiences. And that is, in the end, something that we have learned from the past as well. Several speakers this afternoon emphasized that in the bubbles, in situations where communication is reduced to crying into an echo chamber, that was an expression that Haroon used, that then we might see the other in the end as an enemy, instead as an adversary in political system. Well, we all know that that was the background, ideological background, of what has happened in Europe as in the past as well, and what we see now in the so-called illiberal democracies, including Hungary, Poland, that so far are developing into more intolerance. It is a view that the others are enemies that have to be excluded from the chance to return to power or to be a partner in power. Well, that is something that I think is really important also in the practical sense. Understanding each other means to accept common standards, constitutional standards, including the way in which, for instance, in our constitution, fundamental rights are specified, which might be different from the way in which they are identified in other constitutions. Human rights require democratic politics. They don't replace it. And that means that there is a need, a real and serious need for people who are able to try to fulfill that role in the Scientific Council of Government Policy, to translate into political relevance the insights that we can derive from real life in society, from research, serious academic research. That requires patience, a virtue that has maybe not yet mentioned this afternoon. Patient work, identifying insights, ideas, and like Corien, I also appreciate to address not only audiences of colleagues, specialists, but also the Katholieke Vrouwengilde in Goorle. And 10 days ago, a group of young people with different religious backgrounds who found each other with shared interest for the value of compassion, interest for the other, interest for other ideas, new outcomes of research. Well, at our level, we try to contribute that to politics in a way that will allow, hopefully, the government and parliament to include different viewpoints, to look around, to take for a moment also the view of the others, the 360 degrees approach, which is so beneficial for human resources departments. It is also beneficial for politics, for the way in which we assist politics. And I think that is a question of virtues as well. We have heard about different virtues this afternoon. Let me add one observation about virtues in the work of an ancient author, Aristotle. For those who did not have a full education in history, Aristotle was in the 4th century before Christ, let's say the Michael Ignatieff of his time in Athens. And he has written a lot about virtues, including virtues in politics. And one of the most interesting observations, in my view, in that part of Aristotle's work is that he, and I think it has often been overlooked, that he said, in the end, the rulers and those who are ruled, the citizens, ought to have basically the same virtues. They have to be able to view things also from the side of a citizen if they are a ruler, and from the side of a ruler if they are a citizen. Well, I think that is, without quoting Aristotle, what we try to do at the Scientific Council of Government Policy, fed by the insights of the people who are gathered here this afternoon. Thank you very much.